Okay, so now we are on video number 5, looking at Jonah chapter 3 today, verses 1 through 4. That's what we have on the right side of the screen. And on the left side of the screen, the black box is just hiding something that we will reveal here in a second. We're going to compare these verses on the right to some verses on the left. And hopefully we'll see the similarities and what's going on here. Again, so if you have not seen the other videos, go back and check those out so you know what's going on in the story. I'm going to begin reading here in verse 1 and making some observations and then finishing with some questions. Some pretty applicational focused questions today. So, verse 1, now the word of the Lord came to Jonah the second time, saying, I'm going to put a little star here, second time. Okay, saying, arise, go to Nineveh, the great city, and proclaim to it the proclamation which I am going to tell you. Proclaim the proclamation which I am going to tell you. So Jonah arose and went to Nineveh according to the word of the Lord. Okay, Jonah, you get some stars too, man. Finally, Jonah is obeying the Lord. Continuing, now Nineveh was an exceedingly great city, a 3 days' walk. Then Jonah began to go through the city 1 day's walk. Okay, let me put some question marks here. 3 days' walk is the size of the city, right? And then 1 day's walk. Okay, what's going on there? And he cried out, this is Jonah, and he cried out and said, yet 40 days and Nineveh will be overthrown. Okay, so that is a message that he preaches to Nineveh. It's a message of judgment, right? 40 days. Look how straight that line is. And Nineveh is going to be overthrown. Okay, you're going to be destroyed. We don't know how that might happen, but that's what Jonah proclaims to Nineveh. It's a little comical even thinking about just picturing this. You have Jonah, this Israelite prophet, who is now in this big important Gentile city of the Assyrians, and he just walks up in there and he's like, okay, 40 days and Nineveh, this great city, is going to be overthrown. We're going to see that sounds crazy, okay? And we're going to see that the Ninevites' reaction to that is also crazy. But we'll get to that next time. Okay, so really what I want you to see with these stars is you have Jonah receives the word of the Lord a second time, okay? And that's important to notice because we're about to get to this black box over here and we're going to talk about that. And he does it, he obeys according to the word of the Lord. So he goes finally in obedience to Nineveh to preach, which is what he was supposed to do at the beginning of the book, okay? So now I'm going to clear everything. And over here on this side, we have the very beginning of the book of Jonah. This is Jonah chapter 1, verses 1 through 3. And hopefully you're starting to see a lot of similarities, okay? The book started out, the word of the Lord came to Jonah, okay? And we have right here, chapter 3, verse 1. Now the word of the Lord came to Jonah. Here we have the son of Amittai. Right, remember that means faithfulness. That is actually left out in the second part. Might be something going on with that. But what is important to see is that this is the second time, right? So God gives Jonah another chance to obey him. And again, the connections continue. It's basically just a repeat. It's almost verbatim, right? Arise, go to Nineveh. Arise, go to Nineveh. So arise, there's going to be all these arrows. Go to Nineveh, the great city, and cry against it. And this is where it's a little bit different. Cry against it, proclaim the proclamation, which I'm going to tell you. So, but this is the huge difference, right, that we want to see. The beginning of the book, Jonah gets up. Remember, we're expecting him as a prophet to obey, and instead he gets up to flee to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. Okay, but here in chapter 3, Jonah gets up and now he goes to Nineveh. He's not going to Tarshish. He's going where he's supposed to go, not away from the presence of the Lord, but according to the word of the Lord. Okay, so a couple snaps there for Jonah as prophet, as he is being obedient and he preaches the word that God gives him to Nineveh. But as we're going to see, Jonah is still not getting it. Okay, and it's kind of hinted at here in this passage, but we're going to see this play out more and more. Okay, throughout the rest of the book. But with that said, Jonah is finally obeying God's call to proclaim his word to the Ninevites. So let me clear that. And let's go to the questions, okay? There we go. 3 questions for you. And this first one I think is really interesting. Jesus calls Peter, the apostle, right? One of the leaders of the apostles. Jesus calls him son of Jonah. This is in Matthew 16. And there's something going on with that, but I want you to think about what are some of the similarities between Peter and Jonah. Okay, there's a lot when you start thinking about it. And I think this says a lot about who God chooses to work through for his purposes. So, and that's what the second question gets to. God can work through people who need second, like in this story in Jonah, or more chances. All right, God can work and often does work through people who need second and third and fourth and so on chances. So what does this show you about God? And then the last question. God promises to bring judgment on Nineveh in 40 days. So I want you to think about what is the significance about that time frame, 40 days. Maybe you can think about other Old Testament stories or New Testament stories. And then what does this teach us about who God is? So thinking about a promise of judgment, but there's still 40 days until the judgment happens. So what does that teach us about who God is? So think about those questions, pray through them. Love to hear back what you're thinking. Miss y'all.